Before we get into the stories, I'm excited to announce I have a new channel called Monster Trail Cams. Here's a quick trailer for my new channel. The link is below. Monster Trail Cams is your ticket to the unseen and supernatural. Sourced from a vast network of mystery hunters worldwide, our channel reveals a collection of strange creatures and supernatural events that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From shadowy figures lurking in dense forests to inexplicable entities prowling under the cloak of night, each chilling clip peels back another layer of the world's untold mysteries. We release new episodes several times a week. Okay, now let's get to the stories. Something wild happened to me in the summer of 2002. I've told this story only a handful of times since then, and nearly every time I've told it, I've been disbelieved. I was 19 years old and decided that summer to head to Chicago on my own. I'm from a small town in rural Ohio and had never been on a big solo adventure, so even though it's really just a few hours drive away, I thought it would be a good way to dip my toes into big city life and make for a fun adventure to tell my friends about when I got back. The only problem was that at that time in my life I hated being alone. I craved the company of other people, and the drive out was feeling pretty lonely after the first hour or so, and that's when I decided to pull off at a rest stop just to not be alone. While walking in, this guy came walking up to me quickly and looked me right in the eyes and basically begged me to give him a ride. Yes, I know it was a risky and dangerous thing to do, but I told the guy I could take him as far as Chicago. I did tell him I had one condition for him riding with me, though. He had to empty his pockets and put everything he had in the trunk. I'd heard horror stories about hitchhikers being serial killers, and I wasn't going to risk him having a gun or a knife to stick to my throat once we were down the road away. He agreed to my terms and hopped in for the ride. At first, he seemed really cool and down to earth. He told me about his upbringing in Northern California, growing up with a twin sister, and how he'd once worked in law enforcement. He was very vague about his role in law enforcement, but I chalked it up to him maybe having to leave the job for reasons he wasn't proud of. But this is where it took a turn for the weird. The guy told me that he was former CIA and that he had wound up learning of a massive government conspiracy and cover-up regarding the Roswell, New Mexico discoveries. He said that we had essentially poisoned these visitors from outer space, declaring war on another planet, and that we are all just sitting ducks now, just waiting for them to finish assessing their options and deal a blow black. He went on to tell me about how he was going to uncover this information years ago and blow the top off the whole thing, and that's when the CIA sent someone to kill him and dispose of the evidence, but he'd managed to outsmart them, and that's why he was out in the world homeless, hitchhiking from city to city to keep from being found out. At this point, I was regretting my decision to invite him along, because I was thinking he was a crazy and maybe dangerous person to be around. I decided to change the subject to something a little less intense, and hopefully get him to calm down a bit so I could work out an excuse to drop him early at the next town. I asked him simply what his star sign was and told him I'm a Leo. He looked at me like I'd just grown an extra head and started demanding I let him out of the car right away. I kept asking him to calm down, but every time I'd try to calm him, he'd panic and yell back at me, "You're one of them! You're one of them!" Finally, I was able to pull off an exit, and he opened the door, jumped out, and ran straight back into a field. I was so flustered by the whole thing that I sped off without even thinking about the fact that I had all his stuff still back in my trunk. That thought didn't occur to me until I was already in Chicago. I felt terrible and didn't know what to do about any of it, but my mother had always told me that if you find something that isn't yours, you should turn it in somewhere where it can be found, and I figured the police were the best bet in this situation. I stopped at the first police precinct I could find and took the stuff inside. I told them I'd given a hitchhiker a ride, but he seemed a little crazy and he took off, and I forgot all about his stuff in my car until then. They had a good laugh and asked me if I'd learned my lesson about offering strangers rides. One officer even kind of half scolded me for taking such a dumb risk. I assured them that I would never pick up another one, and I've been true to my word on that ever since. But that isn't where the story ends. A few weeks later, I was sitting at home in Ohio playing video games in my tiny apartment when there was a loud knock at the door. When I answered, I was surprised to find two men in black suits asking to come inside and speak to me. They had a lot of questions about the hitchhiker and what he might have said to me before he took off running. I remembered what he said about the CIA trying to kill him for knowing too much, and these guys certainly seemed to be agents of some kind, so I bluffed my way through it, pretending he had been so crazy I didn't understand a word of anything he said. It's been 20 years now, and sometimes I still see black vehicles with dark-tinted windows driving slowly by my house. It's super freaky. I'm totally convinced that I, too, am now having tabs kept on me, and I honestly wonder if it's only a matter of time before I have my thumb in the air on a highway, trying to stay one step ahead. I live just outside of Port Gibson, Mississippi, and have always loved the lay of the land out here. There's a lot of history, and, in the Port Gibson area, a lot of little waterways scattered here and there. I moved to Port Gibson about 3 years ago with my friend Craig. We both took jobs at a factory out here and were sharing the second floor of a 3-story house. About 2 years ago, Craig and I were working third shift. For anyone who doesn't know, that's basically overnight. We went in at 10 at night and were scheduled until 6 in the morning but could leave earlier if our work got done and there was an overlap in shifts. On this night in August, there was, so we dipped out around 4:30 in the morning. Craig didn't have a car, so we always took my Pontiac to the factory. The house we lived in was in a rural area of Port Gibson, and we had to drive almost half an hour to the factory, along a long road that wasn't exactly a highway, but close. It's considered a main road out here and runs from Port Gibson, west toward the Mississippi River. In one area, it gets close to Bayou, a muddy river that has a lot of creeks running off it. Craig and I were heading home, and because it was so early in the morning, it was still dark out. We had about a half hour until dawn, and I was driving with the headlights on. I've toned it down in the last few years, but back then, we used to rip around pretty good, and that's what we were doing on this road when it curved closer to the bayou and a creek that passed under the road. As we came around the corner, I saw something in the road and laid on the brakes hard. My first thought was that someone had hit an alligator, which isn't super common but happens now and then, especially at night when they try to cross the roads. I slowed down and squinted as we were coming up on it, but the shape looked wrong, and Craig said out loud that it had to be a body. Unfortunately, bodies have been found in and around Bayou throughout the years, so that wasn't unlikely either. I got goosebumps thinking that we were about to see a dead body someone had dumped and wanted to hit the gas again, but the road was narrow here, and I didn't want to risk thumping over whatever it was. "Slow down a little bit," Craig said, leaning over the driver's side to see out my window better. The thing was on my side of the road and not moving. I told him, "I think there's something wrong," because my brain couldn't make what I was looking at make any sense. Now that we were closer, it definitely looked like an alligator, but also like a human. In fact, I could see 2 legs twisted at odd angles out behind it, with bare feet limp on the asphalt. But the top half of the body didn't make sense. The head wasn't a human head. It wasn't as large as an alligator's, but shared the same shape with an elongated kind of muzzle. Craig swore and pulled back, asking if I saw the scales. I nodded and couldn't speak. We were up next to the thing now, and my window was up, but I was still scared to lean close and get a better look. I did anyway and saw what looked like a messed-up science experiment. The bottom half of the body was human with rough-looking skin, dark in an odd way. At around where the hips started, we could see scales overlapping up the torso and trunk. The creature was lying on its stomach with the arms splayed out oddly, and again, I thought someone had probably hit it. The face was facing away from us, but we could see the hairless head, ridges along the temple and upper cheek, and then the protrusion of the snout. We pulled past the thing, and I kept looking in the rearview mirror, but it was so dark all we could see was the shape of it. "Do you think it came out of the river?" Craig asked. I didn't see where else it could have come from. That section of the road is in the middle of nowhere with no houses nearby, and it definitely looked like whatever that thing was had dragged itself out of the creek. Plus, it was naked. My knuckles were white as we drove back to the apartment, talking and trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Craig brought up the head and upper body first. I agreed that it looked reptilian, but too small to be an alligator. He then asked if I thought someone had done something messed up, like sew a human and an alligator together. I admitted that I'd considered that, but then pointed out that the skin on the lower body didn't really look like regular human skin. We got back to the apartment and hurried inside, both of us weirded out by what we'd seen. Over a quick breakfast of toast and bacon, both of us agreed that whatever it was had to be dead. It hadn't moved at all. We stayed up to watch the morning news, expecting it to be reported. This was about 2 hours later, and we figured someone must have come across it by now. But there were no stories about a reptilian body found near the Bayou or Port Gibson. Craig went to bed, and I tried to sleep but couldn't. Later that day, and for the next few days, we kept checking the news. The body never came up. I have no idea what could have happened to it. Maybe it was actually alive and we just hadn't noticed. Maybe someone removed it from the road. Over the years, I've come to the conclusion that we either saw a lizard-man hybrid or, like I said, some kind of sick experiment. Whatever it was, we haven't seen anything like it again. Nowadays, Craig still works at the factory, but I got a job in town and thankfully don't drive out on that road often. It was summer in Oklahoma and I was about 10, maybe 11. That day, my grandma picked up me and my younger sister from daycare, and we had gone to eat pizza and then go grocery shopping. By this point, it was right after dark and we were taking the same way home that we did every time. But that night, everything was going to be different. The roads were empty, but that wasn't strange in our county where there wasn't a ton of people. I always loved the way the trees lit up when the headlights hit them, and I was watching them out the window as we drove by, trying to not be dizzy as they raced past. We were in Grandma's truck, and so my little sister was in the middle seat and was playing around with the radio. Par for the course for a little kid. She got bored easily. But what wasn't normal was when Grandma looked up and started pointing. Of course, this caught my attention, and I looked up too, but I couldn't understand why she was freaking out at first. It didn't take me long to figure it out. Up ahead and above the tree line, we could see 3 lights. They were just floating there in the sky. And that's when I noticed that my hair started to float up a bit, like it was staticky and everything just felt wrong. The trees weren't moving. I heard my grandma gasp and then pull off the road and into an open field next to us. We sat in the truck and both watched as this thing stayed in one place, just hanging there in the sky. Also, it was creepy quiet. You couldn't hear any noises coming from the thing, like you would if it was a plane or helicopter, or any animal noises either. It was as if we were in a silent bubble, watching the thing hover there in one place. There was no movement, no wind, just absolute stillness. I couldn't believe my eyes, and Grandma obviously couldn't either. She had opened her door and stood with one foot on the ground and one still in the truck with her hand gripping the steering wheel. She looked like she was ready to jump back in and slam her door at any second. I remember looking over at her and seeing that her grip was so tight that her knuckles were white. My unshakable grandma was obviously shaken. Meanwhile, my little sister was excited about the pretty lights we were looking at. She was too young to know that this wasn't normal. Even though it was still warm from the heat of the day, I shivered and was covered in goosebumps all over my body. My hair still stood on end, and it all just felt wrong. Everything was telling me that we needed to run. I didn't understand how I knew that we needed to get out of there, but I knew it. I was scared and yelled for my grandma to get in the truck, begging her to leave. When she finally heard me, she jumped back in and slammed the truck into gear. The tires spun on the grass before we got traction, but once they grabbed, we were racing home. Even as we put distance between us and that thing, the electric feeling didn't go away. I spun around and it was still in the same spot. Not following us, but it was now spinning. The lights were going around and around, and I could see another light underneath it, like a beam shining down. But aside from spinning, it wasn't moving. It wasn't following us. It wasn't retreating, it just stayed in that one place, spinning faster and faster, like a top. I screamed at her to hurry. I wanted as much distance between us and that thing as possible. My sister then started to cry. She was confused because we were obviously scared and she didn't know why. She was only 4, 5 max, and had never seen 2 people at once being super afraid. I was walking around in a wooded area one evening with 2 friends during the summer of 2011. I do not want to disclose exactly where it happened, as there is still some strange activity going on now, and I don't want those involved to be at risk. Anyway, on this particular night, my friends and I had stupidly decided to take a walk into the woods after happy hour at a local bar. We had nothing else to do and didn't feel quite like going home yet, and we enjoyed sometimes getting away from the city lights. So we drove off to a local park, parked, got out of the car and headed down one of the nearby trails. We knew full well that the sign said the park closed at dusk, but after a few beers we didn't really care about the rules. I know, we were stupid. Anyway, after we got a bit into the woods and away from the city lights with only moonlight to see by, I began to notice what looked like the movement of large animals darting around in the woods. I kept getting quick glances of shadows darting around. At first, I thought I was seeing things on account of just leaving happy hour, but once I had my friends look too, we all agreed that something weird was definitely out there. We decided to stop walking and stand in one place, stand in a sort of circle, but with our backs to each other so that we could all see out. We stood there and we watched. However, none of us were in a super patient state of mind, and within only about 5 minutes, it seemed to all of us like nothing more was going to happen. So we all sort of relaxed a bit, when all of a sudden something slid out from behind a tree and charged our circle. It was huge, and it happened so fast that we didn't have any time to effectively react. But luckily, my one friend managed to kick the creature with his foot while the other managed to grab and hold on to the fur on its head. I thought that was a pretty stupid idea. But I was frozen with fear and had no idea what to do. I literally couldn't think. All I could think was if we would all be able to make it out alive. And that's when the creature that my friend was holding onto started thrashing around and howling, which made me think of a werewolf movie where the creature is actually transforming into a dog. I don't even know if that's a real movie, but I kid you not, that's what came into my head at that moment. Obviously, this thing we were dealing with was huge, and it was able to break free of my friend's grip instantly. Anything could have happened next, but we all watched as it ran off in the woods in the direction that we had previously seen the figures moving around. My 2 friends then sprinted out of there, but only because I couldn't move. I stayed back for a moment to try and process what just happened. I couldn't process what had just happened and that my friends had sort of fought back at the thing. It was crazy. Anyway, I finally was able to run back to the car and jumped in, joining the other 2 who had run off before me. I was so shaken up that I didn't even think about yelling at them about leaving me there. And I just sat there for a few minutes trying to calm down before I could even function enough to start and drive the car. I asked them what they both thought we had just seen, and they both thought either a dogman or a werewolf. But none of us was really versed at the time on these things, and so none of us was exactly sure. I didn't really want to think about it anymore right then, so I just turned on the car and started driving out of the park. I really don't know what to think of what we saw. Part of me wonders if we saw the only one or if there were more we didn't see. But all 3 of us saw all those creepy shadows, and we all have the same memories, so it must be true that there were more than just that one. But let me tell you, what happened to us is certainly not something you want to have happened to you when you're in a dark forest. All 3 of us are still affected by that night, and it's one experience that I'll never be able to forget, even if I wanted to. And lastly, I'll share with you that I'm a bit worried about the future. I'm pretty sure those things don't fear the human race, and I have a feeling they're going to be more dangerous.